Oops. Wow, we have a lot of people on Zoom today. Hi, everybody on Zoom. Lots of you.
And then right. But it makes you, yes, it's, where is she? She does from home and, oh. And then she teaches in person. Those things are the things I could also talk about. Research in person. And I'm in psychology. And so they find out the sense of that direction, so she can see closely. I can do that.
Well, welcome, everybody. Seems like a lot of people decided to stay home and Zoom it today, because we've got a pretty good sized group on Zoom. It's a beautiful day. I don't know why anybody would want to stay home, but anyway. Let me get my head back into the right place so that this can flow automatically. We're almost finished with the Middle Ages. We have a couple of these late medieval things to do. And I'm actually kind of glad, wait a minute. I can't hear myself. Actually kind of glad, it's better, that we didn't finish, because I don't like to sort of like finish something one day and then another, a week later, start a new thing. I prefer to end something at the beginning of a class because that emphasizes how one flows into the other. I don't want to emphasize the difference between periods. I want to emphasize the similarity because everything flows into everything else. Nothing just stops and something else starts, especially at this moment in time. Hi, Peg. I'm shocked to see you because John is on Zoom. So her husband's home on Zoom. Anyway, welcome. So especially this Italian painting in the late Gothic is directly flows into early Renaissance art. And last time we talked about the revival of altarpieces and how that inspired big painting and really the revival of painting because of altar panels like this. And we made this comparison between Cimabue, who was much more linked to an older, really Byzantine style, very flat, while his student Giotto, it was giving people really what they clearly wanted, which was a more modeled form, more three-dimensional, creating a real sense of space around a three-dimensional figure. And the fact that his style is what everyone wanted to see tells us something important, that people are ready to leave behind the medievalisms. They're ready to go back and reconnect with the physical world the way they had in antiquity. And that's going to lead us into the Renaissance. And we're going to talk more about these humanist ideals today, and particularly Petrarch, because Petrarch's writings really kind of he literally defined the Renaissance. He's the first one to use the word and defined what it meant and talked about his age. But we'll do that in just a few minutes. Boccaccio's talking about human ability to overcome. Humanism is very much a sort of man-centered world, that we do have control over our world, and it's up to us. And that's a very different sensibility than the medieval, you have no control over your world sensibility. And it's what's going to lead to the revival of science and all the things that are going to happen within the next century. Before we leave, however, I was just about to talk about Giotto's big commission, his most famous commission, the Scrovegni Chapel, or the Arena Chapel as it's known. It's called the Arena Chapel. It's a freestanding chapel. And when it was built, it was right next door to an old Roman arena that had been in Padua. And so at the time it was built, people always called it, oh, you know, that chapel by the arena. It was called the Arena Chapel, and we still call it that. The name is just stuck, even though, you know, the Roman arena is gone. This will always be known as the Arena Chapel. Most people don't even know the name of the Scrovegni family that actually commissioned it. And he got the commission to do the entire interior, which is extremely rare. And it's fresco. And I want to talk to you about fresco and the fresco process. We've seen fresco before, but I didn't talk much about it. Fresco is not a new medium in art. It's very ancient. We looked at a fresco from 1500 BCE. Remember the bull leaping fresco that goes back to the Minoans? And fresco is even potentially older than that as a technique. It's one of the most stable of all art mediums. It will last forever if it's done well, but it isn't always done well. So I want to talk about the technique a little bit. I want to talk about buon fresco and secco fresco. Buon simply means true. So true fresco and what's called, are we being attacked by somebody? Oh, oh no, sweet. Sweet puppy wouldn't attack, but. Okay, so true fresco and secco fresco. First of all, fresco is made from limestone. You have to, and limestone, any chemists in here? So nobody's going to know if I'm right or wrong, okay? But I think I'm right. Limestone is actually calcium carbonate. And when you expose it to extreme heat, it turns into calcium oxide. In other words, you take limestone, put it in a really, really hot oven, and it turns into this powder, which is lime powder. And once you have the lime powder, you have to do what's called slaking the lime. And you do that by reintroducing it to water. You put it in a big pit and you pour water into the powdered lime, and that slakes it and turns it into lime putty, which is calcium hydroxide. Now, every fresco painter's workshop would have had a huge pit out behind the workshop, a big pit in the ground that they've thrown powdered lime in and poured water in. And some of these would be 100 years old or more. And you just keep adding powder and keep adding water and mixing it up. And the longer the lime slakes, the better it is to work with as a putty. And when you want to work with it, you scrape out some of this lime putty and you will apply it to the wall. And there are actually several coats. You know, this is made when the wall is built. So this is part of the wall. So you have the lower layers, which have sort of larger aggregate. And then the second to the last layer, which is the auricchio, is made with finer material mixed in with it. And then the very top layer, the intonaco, is very fine. Really, sometimes they use marble dust. It's that fine. And what you do is you lay down the second to the last. What you're seeing here on the left is the second to the last layer, and then they've transferred a cartoon onto that surface. Once it dries, these dotted lines, they would take a huge sheet of like linen and sort of poke holes around the outlines of the form, and then you lay it against the wall, and using what's called a pounce bag, it was filled with synopia, and synopia is a kind of red pigment, and you bounce that off the wall, and then when you take the fabric down, it leaves little red dots. It's just like tracing paper. It leaves little red dots around the outline. So you've kind of laid out the design on the wall. Now you go back to do the final layer, and that is where the painting is, and that's the line putty. And you only put down a small amount. You work literally from upper left to across. You work in that way, almost like it's a digital image. And you put down a small amount of that putty, and while it's wet, you paint over it. And you put down however much you need for what you're painting. Let's say you're doing just a solid blue sky, you can put down a whole lot because you can paint it really quickly. It takes about 8 hours for it to start drying. And the minute it starts drying, chemical reaction takes place and it bonds that pigment to the wall. So if it's a really detailed area like a face, you might only put down maybe that much, and you spend the day really carefully painting the face. And fresco is actually chemically bonded to the wall. That's what makes it really stable. It's not painting on a wall surface. It's literally chemically bonding to the wall. And in fact, the colors of fresco are at their most intense about 100 years after it was painted. So no fresco painter has ever seen their work at its finest. Now, the problem is on every fresco that's ever made, mistakes were made, that you were a little too optimistic and you thought, oh, I'm going to get all this painted, but it's starting to dry, and you think, no, it's okay, I'm going to keep painting, and it didn't work. And what will happen is it doesn't chemically bond and it will chip off. If you see a fresco and there are like spots where the paint's off, what's happened is that's not true fresco, that's secco or dry fresco. So let's say you've got an area, okay, I screwed it up and that didn't bond, I got a little circle of area. What I'm going to do, rather than do the whole process or chip it out, I'm going to take some water and mix some of that lime in it and brush it on and then paint on the surface. Now that'll get you by. That'll, at the time, it'll stick and it'll look the same. But 200 years later, that's going to chip and fall off. So it's a combination of true fresco and secco or dry fresco. And every fresco has areas like that. Nobody's perfect. Yeah, Bonnie?
What did they use for pigment?
Oh gosh, Bonnie wants to know what they use for pigment. I could go on and on and on. Anything, let me just put it at that. Anything that has color that you can grind up and dry out and turn into a powder, someone tried to use it as pigment. For sort of earth tones, certainly minerals and rocks and things. For brighter colors are generally organic matter, like beetle wings, butterfly wings. They've experimented with just about everything. Some semi-precious stones are ground down. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes, to make certain colors. So it could be anything, and they experimented, and this is another one of those secrets. There are a number of sort of industrial secrets in the art world. Artists didn't want other artists knowing their materials and how they worked, because if you could do a good job at something, people came to you. So you didn't necessarily tell everybody how you mixed your paints or how you were getting your pigments. You taught your apprentices, but you didn't tell the world. Did you? Yeah.
In Milan, the Last Supper, Leonardo's.
We'll be looking at that in just a little bit. Well, maybe not. I don't know if we'll get there today.
Is that secco fresco?
Oh, that's more complicated. That's a combination of, he was really experimental. It's a combination of tempera and oil, but there are some secco areas. But the problem with that, why it's in such bad shape, is his experimentation with mixing tempera and oil paint with fresco. And he was trying all kinds of things and it just didn't work. And it's been unstable. Literally in his lifetime, it was already in bad shape. He just tried too hard to experiment. So that's how a fresco is made. I've made a fresco in grad school. We had this class, I can't remember what it was called, but we had to recreate artists' materials and techniques. and we learned how to make ink. And we had to go out and find goose feathers and cut a quill, and we made a fresco, we did gold leafing. And the one thing I remember about fresco is how much heat it puts off. As it dries, one of the processes is it gives off heat. And we just had like a little box that big, and it was just like an open oven door. So you can imagine a room like this would have been really uncomfortable with all of the heat coming off as it dried every day. So yeah, that's why it's good to just sort of do some of these things. And you make ink, by the way, by using wood ash, and then you have to experiment with different things to stabilize it. Like you could put perfume in it, or different kinds of alcohol to stabilize it, and it gives you different tones and colors of ink. It was really fun to attempt. I want to just look at primarily one image. One advantage of doing the whole thing is that you have a unified space, or a more or less unified space, as opposed to a dozen different artists using all different scales and all different styles. And he could sort of create a unified sense of space. And you see it sort of in images like these four, where you get the raising of Lazarus. Is he going to be okay? Is the window wide open? I'm going to worry about him.
All four windows, he's got water, a rug, a chew toy, and a bone.
I just worry about the heat. It's not too hot today, so I mean, it's not like it's not 90 degrees.
Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no
He
problem.
had his opportunity, but he blew.
Well, he's just a little guy and he's not that interested in art anyway. I'm assuming. So, excuse me, we have four scenes from the life of Christ. Lazarus on the upper left, the resurrection. No, the first miracle was upper left, and then Lazarus, and then resurrection and the lamentation. And I just want to look at the lamentation. It's one that we look at, I think, more than any other. You see all these little divisions, which weren't visible at the time, but what you're seeing are the giornata, and giornata just means day in Italian, but it also refers to how much you can paint in a day. In other words, each little segment is one day's work. So that's one day's work. One thing you might notice right away that's very different from medieval art we've seen before. Has anybody noticed anything right away that's different from all other medieval painting we've looked at? What color is the sky? What was everything else we looked at? Gold, right?
Gold.
Everything was set in a gold leafed
Right.
other worlds. This is not. This is set in the real world. He's bringing it down to earth. And that's really unheard of at the time as an idea, but certainly something that looks forward to the Renaissance, because instead of what they wanted to do in the Middle Ages was take these stories and take them out of the physical world and put them in this spiritual timeless realm. That's what gold leaf was for. Now in the coming Renaissance, they're going to want to take these spiritual events and ground them in the real world and say, look, these were real people. Exactly the opposite message. And this is how he responds to that, by putting it in the real world. It's also very dramatically asymmetrical, but he's quite sophisticated in getting your eye to look down here in the lower left-hand corner. We have, for example, let me see if I can get my laser pointer to work again. We have this wonderful rock face that functions almost like an arrow, drawing your eye down there. Not to mention all of the people, all of whom are sort of looking at Christ down there. This, of course, the lamentation is after the crucifixion. He's been taken off the cross, and people are lamenting the death of Christ. That's what we mean. And some of you have heard me say this before, but it's one of my favorite student bloopers. I got a student on an exam that identified this once as the lamination of Christ. I love to share these because It really, you're sitting there in a terrible mood, reading these horrible exams, thinking how you're just wasting your life. Because they're saying the most inane things, and then somebody says this, and it makes your day. It's just like, okay, it was all worth it, just for the lamination of Christ. I got a million of these, by the way. I'll be glad to share them as I think of them with you, but he is not, I get this vision every time, right? Laminated Christ. But it's actually quite sophisticated. He's creating space, not only with the blue sky behind and the stone and the overlap of people, but a very unusual way of showing these figures with their back to us, creating this almost circle that goes in and out of space around the body of Christ. And that is a new spatial conception. My favorite figure is this, probably the young Saint John. And we know what he's trying to do, but he doesn't as yet know exactly how to do it. You're meant to read it as if both arms are out like this and you're looking at him from the side, but instead we get one hand growing out of the back of his neck and this hand sort of going straight back. He doesn't know how to foreshorten, and we're going to talk about foreshortening, where he would bring the arm around and paint it shorter so that it would look like it was coming out at you, but he doesn't have that yet. But you get the idea that he wants to use these forms to create space and doesn't as yet understand it. People often ask about the halos that are sort of oddly sort of at the side of the face. It depends it's odd, but it depends on what you think a halo is. A halo isn't a hat. It isn't something that moves and turns with someone's head. It's an emanation. It's a light source. So that's why he's showing it, no matter how your head is, it's just emanating in a circle around you. I think in many cases, in some earlier paintings, they show them almost as if they are a kind of hat that they're wearing. But in this case, it's just an emanation.
What in the back behind Mary?
Who are they? Just mourners. Just mourners. It's hard to identify specifically who he had in mind.
That must be Mary Magdalene that's standing.
It's possible. I'm not sure if that doesn't look really, this would be the Virgin Mary. That's very likely Mary Magdalene, but there's no symbolism to show you. Yeah.
You talk about the differences from the gold sky to the blue sky, and I'm wondering, were there people in that era that were looking at that and commenting on it? Were there art critics that were writing about this?
No, there weren't. There wasn't any sort of professionals writing about it, but that doesn't mean people weren't talking about it. There were workshop owners and journeymen, and people were saying, the word was out, look what's coming out of this workshop, this is more real. That's what I want. I want you to do my wall because I like that style. So there's certainly people talking about art, all the people in the art world, but they weren't professionals yet writing about art. That begins in the Renaissance, but it's a little early for here. Yeah.
You mentioned this whole chapel was commissioned. Someone would have a huge ego.
Yes, they did.
To do a whole chapel.
Yeah, and there's a reason for it. The Scrovegni family were well known for usury, and they had just gotten in trouble with it. And they had just been, what is it when the Pope forgives you? What's it called? Anyway, whatever that decree is, the Pope had just forgiven them. And in honor of that, what? Dispensation. Yeah, that sounds right. This chapel was built because of that. So there were political reasons why the family needed the good press right now with the church and with the state. So yeah, good question, Bonnie. That's why the whole chapel was built. But we're going to talk more about these families with big money and how they govern the direction of art in really just a few minutes, because that's how the Renaissance really begins, and especially in Italy. In addition to the style of Giotto, the other style that develops in the 14th century is the Sienese style, a style of painting that developed in Siena, which is not that far from Rome or Florence. And the Sienese style is a very special one. it absorbs, it's a merging of several different styles. It's a merging of certainly elements of the Byzantine, elements of Giotto's figures. The figures are a bit more three-dimensional, although you can see it's still gold leafed everywhere, but also very influenced by the French Gothic. And if you remember, we looked at the French Gothic last time, and it was very elegant. I mean, there's a real beauty to the French Gothic, beautiful sway and elegant drapery, and that is affecting the Sienese painters. So it's a combination of all of those. And this by Duccio, the Maestà. Now, when we put a name on these, understand this is the workshop of Duccio. There are a whole lot of people painted this, not one person. The fact that we know his name, that we know Giotto's name, and that we knew Cimabue's name is itself inherently different from most of the medieval art we've looked at. We didn't know names. These Italians want to be known. They don't see themselves as master craftsmen anymore. They see themselves as artists, and that's going to become more and more prominent. This was very famous altarpiece, very large altarpiece. You're seeing the front and the back. It's two-sided. Now, the image of the back on the right is actually a digitally created image because the individual panels have been separated long ago, and they're in museums all over the world. So someone has collected images of all of the panel and reconstructed it digitally so we can see what the back would have looked like when all the panels were in one place, which is really nice that you can do this digitally. Couldn't do that before.
So Peggy,
Yes.
are you saying that the front piece is a separate piece of wood from the back piece?
Yes, it is. It's not painted on the back. They're all separate panels.
Okay. Okay. So the front piece is still all together, but the back piece
Correct.
is all separated.
Yes, the small back pieces. Honestly, as far as the front, these panels down here in the predella, I honestly don't know if they're there. Generally, if something could be taken apart and sold for more money, somebody's gonna do it. And that was clearly economic in taking it apart. Yeah, but they're in two completely different styles as well. So let's take a look at the front panel. Here, the one on the left is the huge front panel, like 7 foot by almost 14 foot. And the one on the right is one of the many small panels, 20 inches by 30 inches. And I think you can see how dramatically different the styles are. The one on the left is the Maestà, which means the Virgin in Majesty. It's a depiction of All Saints' Day. It was, in fact, carried in procession. It's so famous in Siena. It was carried through the streets of the city when it was completed and taken to a Siena cathedral. There are 20 angels, 10 saints, and the 4 in front are the 4 patron saints of Siena. There is an inscription on the base that says, Holy Mother of God, be thou the cause of peace for Siena and life to Duccio because he painted thee thus. So there's this came out of Duccio's studio. So this is Duccio, patting himself on the back. And this shows you he's not only wants his name known, he's proud of what he's done, and he wants everybody to know he's proud of what he has done. It's very formal design, very still and quiet, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly balanced. Everything is very calm on these layers. It's very, very formal design. Where the one on the back is a very dynamic style. It's a scene of action, the betrayal of Jesus, and you've got these different factors in motion. You've got St. Peter over here cutting off the ear of the slave of the high priest. Movement, motion, energy, quite different. And that's related to both the subject and also the scale of the pieces. So there are right and proper matchings of subjects and styles and scales, and you see it here. So it's very, very elegant. But the finest example of the Sienese style, in my opinion, is the Annunciation of a very popular subject in the late Gothic and into the 1st century of the Renaissance by Martini and Memmi. Annunciation, I'm going to show you some details in just a second. It's absolutely beautiful, and it has that elegance of the Sienese style that we expect, that we've come to expect. In the central section, we get the Annunciation of Gabriel and Mary, and she's a virgin of modesty, which is often seen in the Annunciation. She's typically holding a book. Mary is reading a book when Gabriel swoops in, and she just sort of pulls back, often sort of covers herself. That's considered the virgin of modesty. She's often seen as sort of shocked or stunned because of his arrival. And the two figures, we're not 100% sure about the two figures on the outside. It seems to be different saints. The one on the right is possibly, well, the one on the left, let's do that first. The left is Saint Ansanus. I'm not sure who that is. One of Siena's patron saints, is very typical. And he's holding a banner that has the colors of the city of Siena. And on the right is thought to be his mother, or maybe Saint Margaret. They're not sure. It's either Maxima, his mother, Saint Antonin's mother, or it could be Saint Margaret. Nobody's 100% sure who that is, but the scene itself is clear. Here is a detail of that center section, all the beautiful gold leafing, and you can see the words coming out of the mouth. These are sort of a cluster of cherubim up here with this dove, which is the Holy Spirit. But here's another even better view. You can see how gold leaf is used. Look at all the tooling here of the gold leaf. This is created using like usually a bone where they would carve a little design, and then you like press, it's like hammer it on, and it creates these little indentations in the gold. Yeah.
How do they pass, it is the gold powder?
No, it's gold leaf. Thin sheets. It's pounded down to really the tiniest sheets. I've worked with gold leaf. You can't touch gold leaf. You have to know how to handle it. You have a special tool to kind of lift it up, and then you like blow in the air to move it to where you want it. It's that much, you know, a few molecules thick. And when you lay it down on this red, the underpainting of the red bowl below it is wet. So it just melts onto that when it lands on it. So it's a bunch of sheets, but they all kind of melt together, so you don't see
Is
the
that
sheets.
red place up there where one fell off or something? By the eyes? Oh, that's your.
Here?
That's your.
Oh, that's my client.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've actually done that before.
yeah.
Just leave it there. No, his eyes are not glowing. That's, I have to get that out of the way. Well, you know, it's a big studio with lots of people. This is a perfect thing for young apprentices, maybe an advanced apprentice or a new journeyman. That's you're assigned to that. You gold leaf all of the, you know, maybe in the workshop they got a dozen of these big panels they're working on. Well, one guy's doing, maybe 5 guys are doing the gold leafing on all of them. And then other guys are expert at, you know, painting hands. So you paint the hands and somebody else does the robe. There are lots of different people, but the master of the shop oversees everything. He knows the style. He teaches them the style. So they're painting in his style. So we say who this is by, but the hands, he's operating through these other people's hands often. Yes.
You suppose of those workshops, the master, what did he or she think of individualism? Well,
There's no women working at this. Individualism is starting to become more important. It will be very important in the Renaissance.
with their workshop.
More or less. I'm sure that varied, but as an idea, it's more common. But I think the master is still going to oversee everything. It's going to be the creativity of the master. And maybe he trusts his apprentice because he likes this flourish. So, I mean, it's not an impossible thing the way it was. They don't have like books they have to copy from the way they did in the Middle Ages. There is latitude. And when we look at real Renaissance art, you're going to see all these different styles, and that's okay. Because everybody's got their own different way of doing it, but it is a new thing, individual expression. Yes.
I'm fascinated by the gold leaf. Is that a chemical process too that makes it stay?
No, it just melts on the surface. It's not a chemical. Well, it's almost more glue than, well, I guess if glue is chemical, I don't know. But the paint, the red underpainting below gold leaf has a rabbit skin glue mixed with red pigments, and it's called red bole. And when you paint it on and then lay the gold leaf, it serves as a binder that glues it into place.
So it isn't just water.
No, it's, you're right, without some binder, and I'm gonna talk more about binders actually in just a little bit, yes.
And the two styles that you showed, one on the front, one on the
Yeah.
back, is that the same school, the same?
Yeah, it's the same person, the same school, the figures are very similar, the difference is one is in composition, in placement of the figures, where one is very symmetrical and very quiet, and the other is very active and dynamic. But they're both Sienese style.
In
Yes.
church setting, when did the back part?
When did you see it? You'd have to walk around it. It was setting, it wasn't against the wall. It was setting out so that there was an ambulatory or a walkway around it. So you could walk around and see the back. Yeah, that's a good question too. But the tooling, that sort of little marking, what that does, of course, it functions very much like mosaics at different angles. It catches the light and flickers. It makes the light flicker off the gold leaf in different ways because of the indentations and patterns. And it's just really, really beautiful. But you can see the Sienese style. It's very elegant. I can see the influence of the French Gothic in the elegance of the face and the features and the hands. Bonnie?
In the other panel, the person identified on the far right,
Yeah,
they're holding a cross.
yes.
Okay, but we're holding a cross at the same time Gabriel is telling Mary she's going to have a child.
Oh, we see crosses and scenes, always see crosses and scenes of the Annunciation.
Okay.
They're not,
It's timeline isn't exactly accurate.
no, it's not, this is not a modern world. That's an icon of the cross, not an image of the crucifixion. It's a foreshadowing, a symbol of what is to come. And you typically see a cross in there as a reference to Christ and where he will end up. Yes.
Is this still considered Byzantine?
Mm-mm. Sienese style is not Byzantine, but there is Byzantine influence in all of this 13th century painting. I mean, 14th century painting, there has to be, because they had no other models in the West. So it's influenced, but it's far removed. It's a merging of a little Byzantine in some ways. Certainly the gold leaf is Byzantine. And the elegance is French. Where you see modeling and shadow, that's Giotto. So it's a little bit of everything. Notice how the angel's face is a bit greenish. That's that underpainting showing through again. And notice the words coming out of his mouth. It says, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." That's typically what you will see coming out of the Gabriel's mouth. We have symbolism here. The white lilies are the symbol of purity. We're going to see more of that in later work. Here is Mary. She's meant to look modest because she's pulling her mantle. Now, have I talked to you about her mantle yet? The outer garment that Mary is shown with is called the mantle. Typically her principal garment, like a dress, is going to be a red color. The mantle is always blue, and it's painted in a dark ultramarine blue, and it's made from lapis lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone found only in Afghanistan, and it had to be imported and then ground down into a pigment. When you use that, it means it's the most expensive paint you can have, and therefore it is reserved for the mantle of the Virgin Mary. You will not see that blue anywhere else. And it will always be on her robe. And we have contracts for art. You know, we have literally written contracts where a patron has contracted with an artist or a workshop, and it will spell out not only the details of the painting, but it will spell out exactly what paints will be used, how much of what's colors, which colors, and it's priced, you know, out by the colors that you have. So, I mean, we have a lot of information about, you know, what was agreed upon in advance. And we know, you know, what is expensive and what's not. Yes.
Well, who determined the composition of these things?
Well, usually that sort of thing is worked out with, it's going to be worked out with the patron, whoever that is, whoever's paying for it, and the artist, along with someone from the church, an advisor from the church. Maybe the patron is the church, so they don't need a separate advisor. But if it's someone else who's, say, a rich family and they want to commission an altarpiece and donate it to the church, then you're going to have a member of the church, you're going to have the patron is paying for it, and the artist, and they're going to sit down and work out a composition, a design, and then, you know, you're going to work out the cost and all of it in advance, and a contract would be drawn up, and only then would work begin. This idea of artists just off on their own making art and selling it does not exist at this time. It just doesn't exist as a concept. It will, but not yet. And this is our beautiful Sienese painting in the Nelson Gallery, also by Memmi. And it's a lovely piece. It depicts, it's just Memmi now on his own. It's clearly, you see the Byzantine, it's a good example of Sienese on its own. It's sort of elegant. And it makes an interesting comparison to the 12th century Vladimir Virgin. Did I tell you about the blooper I got on that one? I got a student once who identified that as Vladimir and the baby. Anyway, clearly there's a relationship. There's no question they know all of the Byzantine icons, and there's a motif that he's following, but he's much more concerned with depicting the naturalism, the elegance, the beauty, and the like. And as far as the figures and the little rondelles up above, not really sure. My guess would be the one on the upper right looks like John the Baptist. Now, this is obviously problematic if you're trying to see it as a single narrative, because he's the same age as Jesus. So, but that's not what's going on here. Usually when you see somebody like, excuse me, really scruffy looking, that's John the Baptist. He's always depicted that way from his days in the wilderness. That's usually how you, sometimes with animal hides that he's wearing, but he'll be pretty scruffy, and the other saints usually aren't that much so. But anyway, check it out. Now, both of these were originally wearing these ultramarine blue. It's sometimes called Marian blue. Marian blue implying it's for Mary, but often they mixed it with materials, bituminous materials or other sorts of things that were unstable, and over time it turns black. So there are many paintings where she looks like she's wearing a black robe. I guarantee she wasn't originally wearing a black robe. It was simply an unstable mixture of that blue paint that has aged. Okay, see this? See this? New book. That means we've just gone through a paradigm shift. We've gone through, as humanity, a number of paradigm shifts. The last big one we encountered was at the end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages, when the Christian church and the predominance of the Christian church created this huge paradigm shift away from the values of the ancient Roman world and to the values and beliefs of this new Christian world. This shift from physicality to spirituality. And we're about to encounter change again. The ideas that had been in the air as early as the 13th century, in one extent, you know, that sculpture we saw in Rheims Cathedral that was so like Roman sculpture, that was 13th century, but mostly it's the 14th century where you see all the changes. For one thing, emulation of the ancients is beginning. Their physicality, influence of the Franciscans is going to continue and grow. the importance of experience and observation. This is something that Franciscans bring as well, led to an increasing rejection of medievalisms. Now, what do we mean by medievalisms? Primarily, I'm referring to the use of extreme detail and symbolism, just filling every image with lots of little symbols, although it's going to take a while for that to disappear. True Renaissance art is going to simplify a scene and get rid, you're not going to see any more halos, you're not going to see any more of tiny little details of things. Also, medievalisms like the distortion of form and the elongation of form and the like, those will go, but they don't go overnight. And there are transitions, and there are places for the 15th century that still have a lot of medievalisms, while they also have elements that are clearly of the Renaissance. And that's going to happen more in the north, not so much in Italy. So we're going to look at two primary areas for the early Renaissance. In the north, in Flanders, which is basically Belgium and the Netherlands today, very important region during that time, and it will continue to be a very important region, at least up into the 18th century. One reason is because of shipping. They were the great merchant shippers of the world. It's one of the wealthiest parts of Europe, Flanders was, because of shipping trade, and art follows wealth. Because this is a wealthy place, it's where wealthy patrons are going to be, it's where artists are going to be, and it's where innovations are going to happen. Now, at the same time in the 15th century down in Italy, we'll come back to that after we look at Flanders, there are also many, many wealthy patrons there, and we'll talk about why. Their wealth comes from other things. But I want to take a look at what I like to call proto-Renaissance art, also known as Northern Renaissance. Northern Europe is different from Southern Europe. Northern Europe will not fully embrace the Renaissance ideals until about 100 years after the South. It begins in Italy, slowly moves up. One reason it takes so long is the stronger guild system in the North. They're going to fight against change. They're going to fight to control everything. It's going to take longer. I'm talking not only the Netherlands, but particularly Germany. We'll talk more about that because German artists are going to fight very hard to get the kind of freedoms that Italian artists have. It's just going to take them longer. I like the word proto-Renaissance. It comes from my background in archaeology. I'm going to admit, I'm the only one that uses this term. You're not going to find, they're just going to call it Northern Renaissance, whatever. I like the word proto. In archaeology, we use that term because it implies, it's different from pre. Pre means something that came before something else. Proto implies it's right at the beginning of something, but it has characteristics of something older and something newer. It's like a bridge between two things. It's a perfect word in archaeology. It's a perfect word in art history too. I don't know why they don't use it. They just don't, but I do. So this is proto-Renaissance. Art historians understand that Northern Renaissance isn't truly Renaissance yet. But if you name it proto-Renaissance, it's clearer what we're really talking about. So let's take a look at what is Renaissance about it and what is still medieval about it. The importance of the great altar pieces is going to continue. So I wanted to show you a few designs and get some terms clear. Diptychs, of course, 2-panel pieces, triptychs, they can have wings that open and close. Something this complicated, we just usually call a polyptych, which just means it has a whole lot of panels, saves worrying about how many there are and counting them and coming up with the right name. It's a polyptych, that's all that matters. Some of them are hinged and open up to more images inside. They started actually as covers for sculpture. Originally, you would have a small sculpture and then you would have doors that closed to protect it. And then you would open it up on a Sunday and see the sculpture inside. And then they started putting paintings inside. And then they decided, well, let's have another level. Let's open it up once and then let's open it up again. So doors within doors, and some of them get really complicated. They will all have a lower area called the predella, a horizontal area directly below the principal altar panels. And we'll talk about the predellas and images there and the symbolism of the predella. But let's talk about oil, because this is where oil painting begins. It begins in Flanders. We don't know exactly how. There's evidence that people have been experimenting with it a little bit for a while, but in terms of really using it, they hadn't yet. I want to talk about the materials of paints. Pigment, the powdered matter, whatever it is you've ground up to make the color, that powder, that is the same no matter what kind of paint you're working with. Pigment is pigment, whether you're making watercolor or a fresco or an oil, you know, the pigment is the pigment. The vehicle is a liquid material that you mix that pigment with. Most paints are water-based. Majority of paint types are water-based. You just mix the pigment in water, but you can't just stop there, because if you just took pigment, dissolved it in water, painted, as soon as the water dried, the powder just fall off. You have to have a binder. You have to have something that locks it together. And that binder is what determines what kind of paint it is. There's only one kind that has turpentine as a binder, and that's oil paint. Of course, it is not water-based, so its vehicle is turpentine. But if you use egg yolk as a binder, you have tempera paint. If you use egg white as a binder, you have glaire. Glaire is what all those beautiful illuminated manuscripts were painted with. They use the egg white so that they don't distort the color, that luminous color on the pages. Linseed oil for oil, gum arabic gives you watercolor, milk gives you casein, lime mixed with water, and when it dries, that gives you fresco. So all of the different binders are what determines what kind of paint you're using. So these are the materials you're working with. Now, the reason oil paint doesn't come along like, oh, good, we invented new oil paint, let's paint this way. It starts the other way. Here's a new kind of art we want. We want things to look more believable and realistic. We want them to look three-dimensional. We want them to look more like life. You can't do that with tempera. It is not physically possible. Tempera paint, which they made the icons out of, etc., that is transparent or translucent at the very least. And you can see through it. It doesn't mix well. It dries very fast because the binder is egg yolk, and that will dry very fast. You can see why egg yolk is a good binder. Both eggs and milk are natural emulsions, and a natural emulsion is the natural mixing of oil and water. They have oil and water, and if you've ever left, you know, egg on a plate to dry, you know it's like concrete, right? It's a perfect binder. So that's why it is used. But this need to have a paint that could hold beautiful colors that was opaque. The need for opacity was important. We needed to have something that you couldn't see through. This is how you can put light colors on dark, and we're going to see examples of that. You can't put light on dark in tempera. If you paint something and put like a little white on top, the white will just disappear because you'll see right through it. You can't get highlights, and you can't get realism without highlights. And we'll see examples of that. So we're working in layers. Oil is painted in a technique called glazing. It's where you mix it. It's not the way people paint today. Today, painters working in oil will just mix the color you want and put it on the surface. That's it. But that's not how they worked prior to really they'd forgotten how to do this by the 19th century. It's a thin paint. It's a thin oil paint that's put on thin layers, and you let each layer dry completely before you put another layer on, and let it dry completely and then put another layer on. And it took a very long time. These are big workshops, and there's drying paint everywhere. Typically, you would put one glaze layer over the top, maybe that it's just without any pigment, but glazing refers to the layering, thin translucent layers. And what that does, it allows the light to penetrate down through these layers and bounce back up. You know, it's called fat over lean. Any oil painters here? I think it's called fat over lean, which means each layer has more oil in it than the layer before. So the lower layers have more pigment and oil, and then the next layer that ratio changes, and there's more oil and more oil and more oil, so that the upper layers are more translucent a little than the bottom layers are opaque. So the light will penetrate down through these layers and bounce up. That's what gives oil its beautiful reflective quality, its beautiful power. It also can be mixed. With tempera, at the most, you can get maybe, if you want to paint like the robe of the Virgin Mary, maybe you can mix 3 different blues. That's it. But that's not going to give you realism. With oil, you can have, almost an infinite range of shades and tones of a color that can create this real sense of folds and shadows, and the reality of oil is special. The other thing that oil, and this is how oil is different from acrylic, although we're not really talking about acrylic yet, it doesn't exist clearly, but oil paint, when it's wet, dries to exactly the same color it was when it's wet. It doesn't change color. If it's this color wet, it's going to be that color dry. And that's definitely not true of something like acrylics or other, even watercolors don't dry the same way. They're slightly different, but that's a real value for artists. So now let's see what they do with this new oil paint. I'm just showing you this to get a sense of the scale. I'll show you detail in a minute. This is very famous triptych. It's in New York. It's in the cloisters. It's a beautiful little piece. It's known as the Merode altarpiece. And this is it. It was privately made. Clearly, that's too small to be sort of like on the main altar of a church. It was privately made for someone's private altar. And it's hinged. It depicts the Annunciation in the central panel. It's actually meant to be read as a continuous space. We have the central panel. On the outside are 2 people, and we'll come back to who those 2 people are, who seem to be opening a door. And the impression is they're opening the door and looking into this room. And then on the far right, we have an older gentleman. And the assumption is that that's another room. And then there's just a door in between them. So who's the guy on the far right? You think?
Saint Joseph.
That's Joseph, right? That's Joseph. We'll talk about why he's in the other door. Let me get my laser pointer out of the way before we mistake it again. So let's look at this central panel. We have, oops, let's leave it here. We have Gabriel, who's just swooped in. And see, she's not even aware of him yet. She hasn't looked up yet. This is very medieval in many ways. The main thing that's Renaissance here is the oil and the color. But in terms of how the story is told, it's still very medieval, because it is still very early for the North. It's filled with lots of little symbols as well. And so she's not even aware of him as yet. She's still reading her book. We know he's just swooped in because you see the book on the table, the pages are sort of fluttering in the air as if, his entry has just created that fluttering. The drapery itself is actually a very northern style. It's a very heavy kind of drapery with lots of folds. You don't see that so much in Italian art. Other symbolism, you get the vase with the lilies, the white lilies symbolize purity. You get the vessel, the gold vessel in the background that symbolizes the vessel most pure. This is a prayer shawl. You get the candle that's just gone out. And I want to talk about that because what we're looking at in the upper left, it's hard to see in the larger panel, but there's a tiny little angel baby thing here that's sliding down a beam of light, carrying a cross. And he's pointing, let's see, he's right here, and he's pointing right down here to Mary. This is the moment of the incarnation of Christ. It's meant to be a before, a during, and an after. Before, Gabriel swoops in and tell her this will happen. Then this guy, the baby, swoops down to her womb, and we see this starburst right here, but she's not really aware of it yet. And then the candle, which has just gone out, you can see the smoke. The candle identifies the incarnation. It's from the marriage candle. Supposedly, when you when on your wedding night, when you consummate the marriage, after you consummate it, you blow the candle out. So a candle blown out implies you've consummated the marriage. So in this case, it symbolizes the incarnation of Christ, or the fact that he is now taken physical form in her womb. So there's a before, a during, and an after, all in one scene. And it's very reminiscent of sort of the doors that we looked at, of Adam and Eve, where you had one thing happening and then another thing happening and another thing, all in one scene. It's that sensibility. Now, the room they're in is actually a 15th century Flemish kitchen. This would be tantamount to painting a scene of the Annunciation in your kitchen, in your ordinary home. What the artist is responding to is this desire for grounding these stories in people's experience. Like the church has said, the church says these things. They come right out and tell artists, we want you to, since they have to approve any religious art anyway, we want you to find ways to make these stories in a way that people can connect to them. This is one way to do it, is put it in your kitchen. And maybe people will identify and understand. It seems, we don't recognize the strangeness because we don't recognize that's a 15th century kitchen necessarily. But certainly at the time, it would have been understood. The right side, that is Joseph in his shop. Typically, Joseph will appear in a different frame, maybe in a shadow, off to the side. He will generally be identified as part of, yet not part of, the Holy Family. In this case, he's in his carpenter's workshop. Now look at the detail out the window. First of all, this is not a big altarpiece. And now we're looking at a tiny detail from that altarpiece. This is the style of this altarpiece. It's a style of Flemish painting, very, very detailed. They would paint with tiny little brushes, 1 or 2 hair brushes, to get all the detail. You have a feeling you could zoom in on more of this detail and then zoom in more and see more detail. I mean, and it's very, now we're talking very, very tiny. But what is this thing in his window? What is that wooden thing sitting right here?
No idea.
Anybody want to guess? I would be shocked if you got it. I'd be impressed. Who said that? It's a mousetrap. It's a mousetrap. It's a mousetrap. I have no idea how it works. It looks like a little miniature gallows to me. I don't think they hung the mice. So it's a trap. It's a mousetrap of some kind. So I don't know if you guys can, that's your assignment for next week, is look up how those things worked. And there are other little symbols here that identify who we're looking at. The most interesting panel, however, in many ways, is this over on the left. What you're looking at are 2 individuals. They are man and wife, and they are contemporary 15th century Flemish people. And they're identified as the donors. Now, if you are a patron is someone who commissions a work of art. If you then donate that to a church, you're called the donor. So these are the people who paid for it and then donated it. And one thing you get for being a donor, if you've earned, is the right to have yourself painted into the scene. And we're going to see this over and over again. But notice they're not directly in the scene. They're not in the room where the Annunciation is taking place, but they're outside and looking in. And one of the more interesting interpretations of this piece, which is fairly new, fairly recent, at least in the last 10 to 15 years, is it's been suggested that perhaps this is meant to be a vision, that perhaps these people, maybe they've just been to church and they've just come home and they open the door and they have a vision of the Annunciation taking place in their homes. Maybe we shouldn't take it too literally that it took place then. And there's good reason to interpret it that way. There are other examples of scenes where it's more obvious that it's meant to be a visionary scene. So I think that's a very interesting way to think about this. I can't, nobody can say absolutely, but I think that's a sound interpretation, that the whole thing is envisioned by those people who've earned that right.
They're larger than the main characters.
They are, they seem to be, well, they're about the same.
Well, Mary's face.
Mary's tinier. Well, the space seems to be a little different. They seem to be trying to create, see, he's trying, this is another thing that's looking forward to the Renaissance. But he's clearly trying to create recession and a believable space. He's not doing it scientifically yet, the way they will in the Renaissance. He's doing it intuitively, and therefore he's wrong. But nonetheless, he's clearly trying to make this pull back into space. And in doing so, he's pulled Mary back a little bit, and so she's a little smaller. But we're going to see other attempts. Now I want to look at one of the most famous pieces from Flanders. Flanders and Flemish. Flanders is the place, the art is called Flemish. That's the adjective that goes with it. And that is the very, very famous altarpiece known as the Ghent altarpiece. But before, I want to show you the original frame, which no longer exists. It's would have been unbelievable. It's, you know, it would have doubled the size of the altarpiece. The altar is big enough, but look what the frame would have originally been. We know it's from the workshop of Jan and Hubert van Eyck. Van Eyck is the most famous name of Flemish art. We believe today that Jan is primarily the painter and Hubert was the frame maker, we think, because we know he worked in wood, and that seems to be the case, Jan van Eyck. And the Van Eyck workshop was the most proficient in all of Flanders, and they're the ones really who excelled at this new medium of oil and kept it secret, you know, kept it as a real industrial secret. Too bad the frame was destroyed during the Reformation. Flanders was a very volatile place during the Reformation. We're going to come back to that area when it is the Netherlands, because this is really, we're talking about what will be within the next 100 years, the first Protestant country in the world. And so that's when this frame would have been destroyed. They would have destroyed a lot of, they didn't destroy the paintings, thank goodness. Somehow the frame got destroyed. I don't know the story of that, but here's how it's displayed today. So you could see now double the size of that in its frame, and you can get a sense of the scale. It's in Ghent, obviously, that's why it's called the Ghent altarpiece. What we're looking at is the open view, but I want to start with the closed view. Those wings come in and close, so we'll start by looking at the outside, and then we'll open it up and look at the inside. So this is the closed view. It breaks right down the middle, and it's hinged on the sides, so it opens out that way. It is today in the Cathedral of St. Bavo, but at the time, the church was the Church of St. John, and that is important because we're going to see the symbolism relating to St. John all over the scene. So in the closed view, we have 3 levels or 3 registers. So we're going to look at each one because each one is important in terms of what time period they represent. The upper level, you have figures looking down on the scenes below. The symbolism here is multi-layered symbolism in terms of the subject, but also how each panel symbolically relates to every other panel. Now, at the very top, what we have is ancient times. You have on the outside 2 figures who are Old Testament prophets. It's Zechariah and Micah. And in the middle between them, you have 2 ancient sibyls, one Greek, the one on the left in the turban is Greek, the Erythraean symbol, and the Cumaean symbol is Roman on the right. Now, why do you think they would depict a Greek sibyl wearing a turban, because we know in ancient Greece, people didn't wear turbans. They're getting there. Think about where east, they're thinking Byzantium. They're thinking of a world, Turkish, that's fighting the Turks, that's fallen to the Turks. It's a weird thing, but it's an ancient Greek figure, but wearing a turban, and you have to ask why do we have that? But anyway, all time period. The next level down, we jump to the New Testament. Now, this is a much later time frame. And now we're looking at a scene which is the upper rooms of a church, of a typical church. We're looking out the window at a 15th century Flemish city. Again, it's grounded in the contemporary world. We have Gabriel, we have Mary, and now we have the words, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, written upside down.
What?
They're written upside down because they're speaking to God. And God's up there. There's a logic to it. So when God looks down, he can see it upside down.
He couldn't see it if it weren't upside down.
Right, he's God, but he couldn't read it unless it was upside down. Yeah.
And what would that little cabinet be? With the.
Well, that's just symbolizing again, we get the vessel, with the vessel most pure, just like we had in the Merode altarpiece, and then the towel that symbolizes the prayer shawl. Above her head, we have the Holy Spirit, the dove of the Holy Spirit above her, and the white lilies, all of the things that we would expect from an Annunciation. Now, the lower level, now this is the modern world. Now, this is today. So we have the two donors on the outside, Jodocus Vede and his wife, and he is a very important official of the city. And in between them, really interestingly, are these two sculptures of the two St. John the Baptist and young St. John, and they are painted in grisaille. Now, grisaille is often misdefined. It doesn't just mean, it literally means gray, grisaille, but when we're talking about it in art, grisaille means using grayscale to simulate the look of a sculpture. He wants you to see them as two sculptures of the two St. Johns in a niche. So we have two real people and two sculptures. Now, John, Jodocus is John, and St. John is his patron, and it's the Church of St. John at the time it was made, so that's why all the Johns are here. Now, why did they have to be sculpture? Why couldn't he just paint the two St. Johns as real living people? Think about it. Remember our time frames. Upper level is ancient world, middle level is New Testament time, and now lower level is 15th century. How could St. John's exist in the 15th century? Only as sculpture. Only as sculpture. On that level, they can only exist as sculpture. If they were one level up, New Testament time, he could have painted them as people, but not on this level. It's this, he's maintaining this time relationship of each level, and therefore paints them in grisaille.
Who was the second John besides
John the-
Baptist?
Well, there are actually a bunch of them, but the
A
young,
little bit in this, do we know?
this is probably, I don't know whether he means St. John the Evangelist, or there's another one referred to as young St. John, who's not the evangelist, because the evangelists, who are the four gospel writers, did not live until about 100 years after Christ. They're in a different time frame. The New Testaments were not written at the time of Christ by people who were there. They were written by people who had been told the story. about 100 years later. So I'm not sure which John he's referring to, other than just it's referred to as young John, but there are a bunch of them. And there are a bunch of Jameses too, which makes it really confusing. There's some at the, you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then you've got, so this can't be John the Evangelist. It could be, but I don't know.
Was there an apostle John?
Anybody know their,
Is it an apostle disciple? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
a Last Supper John?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, then that's who this would
John
probably
the
be.
Beloved.
Is that what it's called? Okay, and he's known as a young man, because this is intentionally showing him without a beard to identify him as the young John. He's just referred to that as that in art. So that's who it is, I'm sure. Makes no sense that it would be the evangelist. But look at the skill of the Van Eyck workshop by now. Look what they can do with oil in terms of just the believability and the textures of the fabrics and the movement in space and shadows and highlights. It's really incredible the way they rise out of those shadows. This is what people wanted, and this is what they were gonna make sure nobody else knew how to do. Have these incredible images. Let's see what we've got. We've got in the middle is a very, very rare image of God, the Father. There are no images in medieval art of God, only Christ. If you're going to show God, you're going to choose one of his three versions in the Trinity. You're either going to show the Holy Spirit or you're going to show Jesus Christ, but you're not going to show God the Father, not in medieval art. We get one here. There aren't even a lot even in Renaissance art, but there are some very famous ones. But this is one of the earliest images, God the Father seated on a throne in a papal tiara, beautiful papal tiara, Mary and John the Baptist on either side. The two panels on either side of those, the angel choirs on each side, angels. We believe that those panels originally were part of an organ screen, that there was a huge screen around an organ because they're musicians, and that when that was taken apart, then I, reused them for this altarpiece. And that kind of explains why they don't fit right, they don't line up. Notice how the two below are different widths than the two above. And it gave him this narrow space, which was perfect for a single person. So he chooses Adam and Eve in a very narrow frame for the outside so that it all fits. And it makes sense. These are also the first, the only figures you would ever show nude in medieval art. That's not the case in the Renaissance, where they re-embrace the idea of the sort of classical heroic nude. But at this point in time, it's very unusual. We'll look at the scenes below as well, and we'll talk in a minute about what's below. We'll come back to that. But Adam, as you can see, very believable, even to the point where his face is sort of tanned, the way you would get if you were outside all the time, and his hands, where his body is very white. He's really capturing that reality of the scene. But I think the most credible image on the whole altarpiece is the image of God, where he just goes crazy with oil paint, what he can do now with oil in capturing textures. These reflective surfaces, this is what people wanted. They wanted to see these beautiful reflective surfaces, see all those white dots. Can't do that in tempera. That's what oil lets you do. Those little white dots that create all this realism. People loved it.
Now the crown is at his feet.
Okay, that's the earthly crown at his feet. We'll talk more about that. Symbolism is going to come up again. But that's the earthly crown. He's wearing the papal crown. Talk more about that symbolism. But jewels, this conception of heaven and God and spirituality in the context of gold and jewels is not new. This is also a medieval conception that we've actually counted before. It's why where gold leaf comes from actually is this, and that's from Revelations, it's descriptions of New Jerusalem, streets of gold. Down below, a very important scene is the adoration of the Lamb. We get various figures on the outside. Do I have them? No. Let me go back one more. On the outside, lower level, we have the just judges. This is like everyone coming together. The just judges, the holy knights, or the crusaders. Over here are the pilgrims, and then the hermits on the outside, and then the adoration of the Lamb. Here's where symbolism gets interesting again. We have a lamb on an altar, and he is bleeding into the chalice. This is the Agnus Dei. This is one of the most famous images that appears in Christian imagery. You see it especially in the 14th and 15th centuries. Agnus is just means sheep or lamb. And so it's the Lamb of God, this symbolism using the lamb as a symbol for Jesus in the Trinity. And the blood is the sacrifice. It's also laying the groundwork for the Eucharist, the blood of Christ from the Agnus Dei on the altar. So the white altar cloth is symbolic of the Eucharist. He's bleeding into the Eucharist cup. And it is the Agnus Dei. Also, he is directly in line, or you can see it. This up above, that is the dove or the Holy Spirit. So that when you read them in line, you have the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit all lined up. So we get the Trinity symbolism. Yes.
Zoom in on God's face.
Zoom in on God's face. Let me find the biggest one. That's God's face. It's a very different conception of God than we're going to see in someone later.
Have a white beard.
No, that's Santa Claus. He doesn't have a white beard. I'm sorry, what?
How does the time frame play into this? The top is antiquity, the middle is.
It's not a time symbolism so much. Because they had to throw in some things that don't even go, I mean, the angel choir, what's that got to do with anything? It's not a time symbolism on the inside. It's just the bottom is like everyone coming together. And in this screen, you get even more symbols. I'm trying to see if I can remember who that group is. We get martyrs and saints and papal clergy and holy virgins and other groups. It's like everybody in the Christendom has come and is observing. Yes.
Peggy, how, taking this and taking the screen just before,
Uh-huh.
how do those two things relate?
You
I
mean,
if
you mean the
talk
closed?
about opening up. It doesn't, if we, that first thing opened up into this.
No, they don't really. There's not a symbolic relationship between the closed
No.
view and the
Are
open
there
view.
two different altar things that you just showed us? This one?
No, it's all one piece. That's the closed view and the open view.
That's what I don't get. Because if you go back to the
This one.
Yeah.
That's the closed view. It opens right down the middle. It splits right down the middle and it's
okay, so you
hinged.
close that.
Yeah,
And then
and then you,
the
swing
rest of this is which the second part.
uh-huh,
Is on the back.
is inside.
It's inside where?
It's inside this.
This thing.
This is like a door. This is like two doors and you open the two doors.
Okay. Okay.
It's hinged on the
Let's
outside.
Go from this to the next one again. Of course, there's.
So the outside is on the back of these two wings.
Mm.
So if you, it's hinged right there, and if you swing those wings shut, you'd see the outside.
Okay.
Yes,
But the top one is square, I mean, I don't understand how it works, but the top one is square, what is square?
This one is square.
but these are curved. Wouldn't you see the
This
little
middle.
tips of the corners?
That's what I meant.
That's a good question.
Look, that's what I mean. It doesn't
Well,
say-
I suspect, honestly, I don't, that's a good question. You would see the little tips of those corners, it seems like. Maybe, maybe someone has blocked them off here in this image, that maybe they photoshopped them out or something. But it does seem, because they're the same height, so the little corners would have to be visible there. They must have photoshopped the corners out. Good question, Mary, thank you.
Peggy,
Yes,
so I want to go back to what you were talking about with that lamb and the blood squirting out into the chalice.
Agnus Dei, yes.
So I just want to make sure I understood this. It sounded like you were saying that this picture was sort of indicating that this was sort of the beginning of this part of the ritual in the Catholic Church. Is that correct? Or
No, it's not the beginning of the mass. I mean, mass has been around for a long time. It's just that this image symbolizes that. It's a symbol of, and it links.
okay.
It's
Okay,
just,
well, yeah, because I mean, I figured that was around longer than
oh
this
yeah, no,
picture,
the
so-
mass has been around for a very long time. It's not just beginning. But this is how it's sort of all brought together as a symbol in imagery.
Have you ever seen this image before in earlier work?
I'm not a medievalist, so I couldn't say, but I think it's probably older than this. I don't know that this is the first Agnus
Mhm.
Dei, but it is a period when you do see it a lot. It's the late Middle Ages. You don't see it too early in the Middle Ages, but it doesn't mean the symbolism wasn't there in people's heads. I mean, the idea of the Lamb of God is ancient. It goes way back to the beginning of
Right.
Christianity, the phrase Lamb of God, but imagery, I'm not sure about. Yes. What does it say?
Yeah.
Well, Ecce Agnus Dei is behold, the Lamb of God. Let me see. See if I can.
Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world.
Yep, that's it. That's it. You got it. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So it's kind of a core iconic image. I mean, don't read it as a narrative, read it as an iconic symbol of Christian belief. And this is kind of the core belief. Right? Sacrifice, Christ sacrificed himself, and the whole Eucharist ceremony is a reenactment of that symbol. So it really is a core image.
I have a question. Back to that oval. What's the thing at the bottom of the oval that almost looks like
This?
a well or something?
It is, it's a fountain. And it could symbolize it's octagonal, so it most likely symbolizes the baptismal font. Because that symbolizes rebirth, and that's another symbol in the line of Christ's death and birth, and baptism is meant to be a reenactment of the resurrection of Christ. It's a rebirth. So it's a baptismal font.
You've got the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, not oversee the others.
Father, Son, Holy
Well, I
Spirit.
guess The Lamb is the Son, and
This-
where's the Holy Spirit?
It's right here. This is
Oh, it's got in the middle.
right here. It's a dove, actually. It's a dove that's sort of glowing. It's hard to see.
Okay.
Wait, see? There he is. It's a dove. That's the Holy Spirit. I love the way birds are always associated with spirits, like they're free and they're flying like the spirit is supposed to pull down by gravity and weight.
I'm struck by the Annunciation and the parallel to Zeus. Whose mother was it that Zeus infiltrated
Deny
with the?
Perseus's mother with a shower of gold. Oh, interesting. Okay,
I see the parallel now.
come on, why is not moving? Oh, there we go. Yeah. In mythology, Zeus couldn't get to Danae because her father locked her away, and he turned himself into a shower of gold and came down through this little hole, and it starts the whole story of Perseus. Interesting. I never thought of, I mean, she's not locked in that room, but interesting. Okay, just one more detail. I have to show you detail in the back of this one way back here. And again, look at this. What you're also seeing is he's using a technique called atmospheric perspective, where the further back something is, it's grayer and lighter so that it looks far off. So these hills just sort of disappear into the distance, and it really creates that illusion. It's a new technique. Again, wasn't around in the Middle Ages, but it works to create great depth. It's a kind of view, this painting in particular, since it's like trying to take in like all of the Christian world. So it's like macroscopic and microscopic. It goes from the biggest thing you can imagine to the tiniest thing. And it's a unique style that you see in Van Eyck, trying to capture everything like that, all in one great image. Okay, let's talk Renaissance, real Italian Renaissance. So we finally get here. I want to talk now about, first of all, I'm going to use the term Italian and talk about Italy, but you understand there was no such thing as Italy at this time. It's a bunch of independent and separate nations, primarily focusing on Florence, Siena, Republic of Siena, Milan, Venice. They all have their own slight variations and styles. And it's the writings of Petrarch in the 14th century that have given us our sense of at least what we used to think about the Middle Ages. Petrarch was the one in his writings who talked about the Middle Ages as a decline, as sort of, just a loss of everything. And saw his own age as a new age. He's called it the third age of man. The first age would have been antiquity. The second age was the Middle Ages, the decline. And now the third age they thought of as a rebirth, and he called it the rebirth, the Renaissance. And that was going to revive classical thinking and get rid of all of that old medievalism. So it's from him that we get the name and the whole concept, the whole idea of stagnation, and the thinking of the Middle Ages as stagnation, and he called it the Dark Ages, and all this terminology that was very influential for a very long time. We believed it, and it's really, really not true. There is an economic recovery in the late 14th and certainly by the 15th century. A lot of it is related to the various plagues that reduced the population. They played a role, let's put it that way. The nature of these cities and republics and little empires in Italy is such that very wealthy, powerful people were there. It's also, they're all shipping centers. One of the biggest influences is the fall as early as 1400. Scholars from the Byzantine world were beginning to flood into Italy because it's not going to fall for another 50 years. Byzantium or Constantinople is not going to fall to the Turks for another 50 years, but people see it coming, and scholars are moving west and primarily into Italy, and they're being welcomed by these wealthy families, and they're bringing with them a lot of materials, learning, with them, and they're being supported. You get things like the Neoplatonic Academy in Florence, sponsored by the Medici family, teaching Greek again, studying the writings of the great writers. So that's a big part of it. There are a lot of things that lead to what happens in Italy, and why Petrarch openly says we should look to the classical world. What he did was found a way to link Christianity and the classical world. Throughout the Middle Ages, the classical world was seen as sort of the opposite of the Christian world. It was separate. What Petrarch is going to do is find a way to link them. And I love this quote from him: to study the ancients would have a positive effect on the Christian soul, which is a justification and explaining. He saw his world as becoming more and more corrupt. He looked at antiquity, and quite wrongly, particularly Rome, saw it as a great age of virtue and heroism. And, I would question whether that was heroism, maybe virtue, that's certainly questionable. There's no time that's necessarily any better than any other time in terms people are people. But they saw it sort of with rose-colored glasses. It's sort of the way they're going to see it again in the 18th century. There's going to be another revival of this obsession with the classical world in the 18th century when they discover and excavate Pompeii. And that's going to lead them back to Rome. And again, they're going to exalt it as some great lost golden age. They're even weirder about it in the 18th century than they were in the Renaissance. But that's sort of how they see it as a great age. All these different major countries and cities had families in them, powerful, wealthy families that became supporters of the arts. In Florence, you've got the Medici, and certainly art and culture is going to flourish and center around them. In Milan, you've got the Visconti and the Sforza. We'll encounter them. The Sforza were the sponsors of Leonardo's Last Supper, and we'll look at that. In Urbino, you got the Montefeltros. It doesn't matter who they are, but every city's got these families. The patronage of the arts was seen as having both political and cultural overtones. They did this not because they were just beneficent and liked art. They felt that it said something about you're a cultured person if you're sponsoring the arts. It gives you political power if you can do this. You're demonstrating your wealth and your power when you do this. So there are a lot of reasons why these families are great supporters of the arts, and not necessarily all because they just loved art. Some did and some didn't. But this is sort of one of the things that all comes together to create this movement. And one of the early works, sort of one of the earliest founders of sort of the new architectural style, is Brunelleschi, and his church of San Lorenzo in Florence is one that first lays out this Renaissance ideal. As you can see from the plan, you can recognize what we've seen before with the nave and the transept and the apse and the choir and all of these sorts of things. We do see some new elements that were never there before, and that is these chapels. Notice on the sides of the apse, all the way up, you have a row of these side chapels on both sides, and these are accessed from the side aisle. These would be chapels sponsored by individual wealthy families, and they were known by the family name. And this would be, there would be a small altar, there would be art. We're going to look into one of these side chapels. It has some very important art in it. And the family was responsible for paying for, everything in that chapel. And directly below it would be that family vault and crypt. And so this idea of family chapels and crypts is an important way, to get more money into the church. In terms of the design and the layout of the church, it really is created to be this very clear, this sense of clear, harmonious spaces. It's centered geometrically on the perfect square as a module. This idea of choosing one module as a perfect square, and there's nothing perfect square in a Gothic cathedral. There are all sorts of different shapes. It's a perfect square as a module, and then ratios that would determine the width of the nave, the depth of the chapel, the length of the nave. From one element, everything is calculated. Does this sound familiar as an ideal? It's symmetria. It's symmetria. Remember symmetria? The Greek ideal that beauty and proportion should all be worked out in advance and calculated, and that all you have to do is find the perfect ratio. And if you know, like, the distance, the length of a finger, from that you can calculate all the other parts of the body. He's now applying that to the design of the church, and in a very mathematical way. And he's doing that not to be obsessive, but to create this sort of perfect form, this clear, harmonious space. And these are much smaller churches than Gothic cathedrals, and they're meant to be understandable spaces. Returning to true classical design, those are Roman columns, not complicated compound piers like we saw before. Pure Roman arches, a flat ceiling with coffers, just like a Roman. Of course, the Roman might have been vaulted, but nonetheless, there's a clarity to it, a sense of understanding. You can understand the space when you walk into it. You intuit these geometric relationships, and particularly when you see it in relationship to, say, the interior of a Gothic cathedral, which is vast and organic and rising and really beautiful, but often very dark, where you aren't clear. And I've said it before, but here's the perfect example where the church is a symbol of your relationship to God. And what has changed is not so much an architectural style, but your relationship to God has changed. You now see a God that is understandable and a world that you can understand and that you're meant to understand and you're meant to learn about. And that we'll see more clearly in other works.
And Peggy, because the church went from Augustine to Thomas Aquinas. I mean, the philosophy,
Yeah, I'd like to know more about that,
it's
actually.
totally, you know, Augustine, City of God, mortal sin, all of the darkness.
Right.
And then Thomas Aquinas, no, under Augustine, everything your learning had to be blessed by God for you to truly understand. Under Thomas Aquinas, it's learning through the five senses.
Wow, I gotta read these guys. I've always wanted to, I mean, I have so many things I don't know that I want to learn more about, and I just don't have time. And that's one of the things I've always wanted to learn more about them. But thank you, that's a perfect.
And so then the human being a human being as opposed to being a spiritual thing.
Right. A
makes
human
that
being.
transition. And I mean, and then the church made Thomas Aquinas, you know, the philosophy, the current.
And when, do you know when he lived?
I might say the 14th century,
Okay, well, the timing would be
maybe. I might be off by that.
14th, if it had to be for
12th, maybe the 12th.
that would be really early for those
Okay.
ideas.
So I think the 14th.
14th makes sense, because he's same
Oh,
time
yeah.
as Petrarch, same time as Boccaccio, and same time as those ideas were floating in the air. Thomas Aquinas, everybody. I'm gonna make a point of looking that up, but that's a good philosophical connection. That again, I wish I knew more about, but yeah, it is exactly that moment, and that conception is changing.
He was born in 1225.
Oh, that's early, 13th century.
And he died in 1274.
Okay, so it's Thomas Aquinas, 13th century, so he's before the others, that would be like one of the earliest. Okay, I'm gonna read more about him, because that seems to really define this moment in time. Other architecture, and this is designed by Michelozzo. This is the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, or the Medici Palace is sometimes called the Palazzo Medici. Riccardi is simply the family that owned it later. After that, it became the French school. We'll talk about that in the 17th century. It becomes the French own it later. Anyway, this is in Florence. It is a private home, but it is a private home of the Medici. So it's not your ordinary private home. At this time, there were sumptuary laws in Florence. Sumptuary laws limited how big a building could be, how many rooms it could have, how tall it could be. There were laws to limit the display of wealth. Renaissance ideal was simplicity. You weren't supposed to display your wealth. So the Medici found ways to get around that. If it can only be 3 stories, it's going to be, 20-foot high stories. But it really has a lot of those characteristics. It's a very medieval style. It's hard to get a photo of it because you can't really stand back and look straight on. You can only get these angled views. 3 stories. The lower story is the tallest, and then the others are slightly shorter. It has that Renaissance sense of regularity and rhythm that they like in Renaissance design. A flat roof, which is a very Mediterranean Italian style, and then a cornice at the top that extends out. The lower level is rusticated. Rusticated meaning the blocks are left, they're not finished or polished, they're left very rough looking, and then the next level up is a little more refined, and then the third level more so. So there's a logic and a sequence to this. It reminds me of sort of the stacked columns on the Colosseum, where you had a logic to, which columns were on which levels. It's very logical. When you look at the plan, it's a typical Mediterranean plan. Originally, this doorway was wide open. The doors are high enough so that a wagon and horses can go through. In typical Mediterranean style, the ground, I shouldn't call it first level, I'll use European terminology. The ground level is a service level. That's what kitchens were, servants were, no family was there. The next level up is the living space, and then offices were the next level up. So the family lived one level up and built right out to the street, as you can see. But it does have this same sort of rhythmic sensibility with the rounded arches marching down, and no ostentatious show of wealth other than its sheer scale. They had to tear down 20 smaller houses, 20 smaller homes to build this one house. So the Medici found their way. The interior, again, very classical, with the Roman swags and the Roman arcade. It's really a kind of covered arcade all the way around the atrium.
Is this the second floor?
This is the ground floor. This is on the ground level. This is the open arcade. Some of this is added later. Some of those swags are added later. Yes.
I just want you to back up to that word you used, sumptuary.
Sumptuary laws.
Can you spell that?
Yeah, like sumptuous, sumptuary. Sumptuary. Sumptuary laws specifically restricted open displays of wealth.
But inside they could be.
Oh yeah, just outside. Inside, you go for it. It's just the outside to the public. You weren't supposed to be showy. And that's going to be evident even in portraiture. I got a portrait I can't wait to show you, but we certainly won't get there today. Now, in sculpture, Donatello is generally considered the first to really bring this new fully Renaissance style in his version of David. And we're going to look at 2 other versions of David from 15th, 16th century and 17th century. But this version is bronze. We don't know a lot about the origin of this. We don't know who commissioned it or for whom, but we do know why it was made, because on the original base, there's an inscription that said that it was meant to commemorate Florence's victory over Milan. And David, this is the biblical David, slayed Goliath, is the symbol of Florence, and he's embraced by Florence because, well, we're going to see a number of reasons, but he's really an archetypal figure because he's the little guy who, who beat the bigger guy. And they had just defeated Milan, who was a bigger nation, had a bigger army. And so David was the perfect symbol. They identified with David and what he did. David is also very popular during this period because he's seen as an example of someone who was the master of his own fate. Took control of his life and acted. He's not someone who stood back. He's the underdog who came in and just took control. Now, the story of David and Goliath is a narrative, right? It's a story. He's not just an image of there's David standing there, but this is actually a narrative telling the story of David and Goliath. So again, the problem with narratives is you have to determine a moment in the story. You know, at what point in the story do I depict David? Now, this point in the story is after he has killed Goliath, and you know that because this is Goliath's head right down here under his feet. Now, it's actually the least interesting moment in the story. It's the least active moment. There's no tension there. There's no stress. It's done. It's over with. It's like a quiet moment after the fact. It's in fact what we call the classical moment. The classical moment, typically in Greek art, they would do the same thing. The classical moment is either before or after the action, but never in the middle of the action. That's not a classical sensibility. Classical moment would be a quiet moment. That's classical. It's calm, it's composed. So he chose the moment after the least tension, the least energy or anxiety. And he's standing in a very relaxed, he's very youthful. Of all the Davids, he's really kind of the most accurate to the biblical David in that he's a youth, he's very young, and he's wearing this, people always want to know about the hat. The hat it's a shepherd's hat that identifying him. Now, this is the first life-size nude in art since antiquity, in sculpture, in art since antiquity. And it's not Adam and Eve. It's tapping back into the old ancient conception, going back to the Greeks, that linked nudity with heroism. It's the heroic nude. And those two words go together really through art from this point on, the heroic nude, as if nudity somehow identified you as heroic. And we know in ancient Greece, it was linked to the idea of the athlete, because athletes competed nude in ancient Greece, not warriors, but athletes. And they were sort of the ideal in the ancient Greek world. So they're picking up on that sense of the ideal. It also makes it timeless. And if he weren't wearing that hat, he would be timeless, but that hat links him immediately to a moment in time, but generally nudes are timeless. It's a very soft, relaxed style. It's generally recognized as being more influenced by a kind of late classical Greek art, which has a more exaggerated sway, the more exaggerated S-curve, but it's not like really emotional like a Hellenistic piece would be. It's looking to this aspect of the Greek world. Now, the others we're going to look at are going to choose different periods in that story or in that narrative. So this is Donatello's David, and all of the Davids we're going to see are all related to Florence.
He's also pretty feminine.
Yes, he is, and that has been pointed out. Partially, it's his youth. You know, he is young. He's not meant to be masculine. But some people have suggested, some art historians have suggested that it's almost homoerotic. But we have to always be really careful what's coming from us and what we're imposing on it. We live in a world where we see things a certain way, and that doesn't mean the intent was there, but some have said that. I don't think that's widely accepted, that it's some sort of intentional homoerotic. I think it's more likely that it's just youthful. It's a way of showing his youth, and he's not an adult man yet. But you know, Hermes is certainly not effeminate, and he's in this big curve. But yeah, that people have questioned that. Since we don't know who made it or who commissioned it or who it was for, that's always going to leave a certain, you know, question mark in terms of, you know, why was this made or what was the intent? Just don't know. But bronze, even going to the bronze like this is going back to that, you know, Greek background. In terms of painting, as far as the beginning, we look to Masaccio. And this is this very famous fresco located in a church in Florence, known as the Trinity, with the Virgin, Saint John the Evangelist, and donors. Now it's identified as Saint John the Evangelist, so this is a different Saint John, not the apostle. And it's painted in such a way as to create the illusion of a niche in the wall of the church. And this is as far as what we have, this is the first use, the earliest use of 1-point linear perspective. Now, that doesn't mean it was the first, it's just that as far as we know right now, this is the earliest that we know. So let's talk about what that is and how that works. There are several things needed to create this perfect illusion of realistic forms in a physical space. One of those is modeled form. You have to have a form that appears three-dimensional. And the principal way to model form is through chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro is Italian. It simply means light and dark, literally. And in art, it just refers to that gradual shift from dark shadow to highlight, as you see here. And we see chiaroscuro in the figures, particularly in like the body of Christ. And this is an iconic view of the crucifixion, where we have God, the Father. This is actually, I know it's hard to read. I used to always read that as almost like a collar or like the white of the shirt, but that's a dove. It's another dove. So that's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's why it's called the Trinity. So again, we get the Trinity, and God seems to be standing on a ledge here, sort of with his hands out, kind of holding up the cross. You see chiaroscuro in the body of Christ, in the face, all those shadows and highlights, creating a three-dimensional form. That's where you begin. There's the dove, the Holy Spirit. But in terms of creating the space, we have now the use of 1-point linear perspective. Now, it's said that usually Brunelleschi, the architect who designed San Lorenzo, is usually credited with the invention of 1-point linear perspective. First of all, he didn't invent it. He may have discovered it. And secondly, he's not the first to discover it. There are Roman wall paintings that use 1-point perspective. There's not a lot of them, and they didn't calculate it out in the same way, but the Romans understood perspective. So, but nobody really sort of lays it out and works with it the way they do here. And then Alberti, another architect, wrote a book, De Architectura, or wrote a book, no, his book was on painting, where he wrote about it. This little diagram is meant to be Brunelleschi. What he did was he painted a scene of a baptistry. Notice it's octagonal. And then he took a mirror and made a hole in it and held up the painting and the mirror. And as he looked, he made a hole in the painting. The hole's not in the mirror, the hole's in the painting. He looks through the painting and sees the mirror, and then drops the mirror and he sees the actual baptistry. And if you can do that and they're identical, then you've captured 1-point linear perspective. That's the story. It's one of these apocryphal stories of how he demonstrated to people what he had done, and everybody came up and held it up and looked and gasped what he had done. But what he has done is determine a horizon line and a point on that horizon line that matches a vanishing point, in other words, right at your eye level. And then he's painted this, Masaccio has painted this in such a way that all of the orthogonals converge at that vanishing point. Orthogonals are lines within a painting that identify any object that is meant to be interpreted as perpendicular to the picture plane. Let me explain that. The picture plane is this imaginary surface. It's as if in the Renaissance, you were supposed to think of a painting as a window that you're looking through. And so that imaginary window pane would be like the picture plane, an imaginary surface that you look through. Now, anything perpendicular to that goes straight back. Like if you're standing on the railroad tracks and look down them, you know the railroad tracks are perpendicular to you. They're going straight back, but you don't see them that way. They appear to be at an angle and appear to meet. And that's the phenomenon they're trying to duplicate. If you know that's how people perceive space, then let's use that as a way of creating the illusion of space. And so the lines in the vault that identify those coffers, because that's a coffered barrel vault, are painted at the correct angle so that from your viewpoint, you see them as if it's depth and space. Now, this kind of way of looking into a flat surface is very limited. It's very controlling. It assumes you're going to stand in one spot and look at one spot. It only works from one spot. It's not every angle, different angle, it's not going to have the same illusion. These are just some more complexities. You don't have to have 1 point perspective. You can have 2 point perspective, 3 point. You can have an infinite number of vanishing points, depending on whether the objects are, I mean, this is assuming everything's parallel to the picture plane, but what if it's not? I mean, what if you have something that's at an angle like that? Well, then you need another vanishing point for that object, but they're all on the horizon line. Now, here's the illusion that's created, as if the wall is carved out. Here's where you're standing, here's your viewing point, and here's your eye level vanishing point. And this is the illusion that this is the picture plane. These two figures are outside the picture plane. That's how you're supposed to read them. And that there's even an area down here, the predella is even closer, while these are set back in space. And people have sat down and literally calculated the depth. It's so accurate that you can mathematically calculate the size of this vault that you're looking into to create this illusion. In the last minute or so, he's done other things to draw your eye to this, through the picture, and one is color. For example, we have figures in red, and this is Mary and St. John, and these two out here on the niche are, of course, the donors, and then we have God and Jesus. So the donors here, red, 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 creating this sort of angle that draws your eye up. And then we have blue, 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 creating another angle that draws your eye up. So between the two of them, you've got this sort of crossing of forms that draws your eye up, as well as the mathematical detail of these coffers. So you're looking up into it. Draw your eye up. It's a very precise and very calculated technique. They called it scientific perspective. It is scientific. It's applying science to art, so that you're not taking any chances in the picture. And then lastly, the predella, which is painted in grayscale, because this is grisaille, but the skeleton itself is meant to be read as a real skeleton, not a sculpture of a skeleton, a memento mori in the predella, which says, I was once what you are, and what I am, you will one day be. Now, that is related to the idea of a vanitas theme. It's a memento mori, a reminder of death, and it's meant to keep you humble, that, yeah, you're rich now, and you're young, and you got all this money, but that means nothing, because one day you're going to be just like me. So don't think that highly of yourself. Stay humble. It's a very it's an idea that goes back to, Greek warnings of hubris and vanitas themes that we see, in the 18th century. There's always been that in art, that need to do that. And I point this out because now this isn't an altarpiece, it's a fresco on a wall, but it's designed as if it were an altarpiece because it even has this horizontal predella below the panel. And the predellas typically have references to death, and we're going to see other predellas that have like scenes of the entombment of Christ, or because of the shape. It's like a horizontal body shape. It just lends itself to that theme. So we're going to see that in other works later. So let's stop there for today. And next time we'll finish up the early Renaissance and move on. Yes.
I noticed that the donors are one level below kind of the top low there. And the previous painting where they were off on the side, they were 2 steps down. They were 2
Yeah.
steps up. Is that typical? that
Yeah,
they're
it is.
Lower level?
They're outside the frame somehow. And not necessarily always lower level, sometimes they are, but definitely outside. They're in a different reality. They're in a different frame sensibility. It would be a little too much to have them in the actual scene. So they're given the privilege of observing it, but not necessarily. So is this another vision? Are they having the vision of this? And it's hard to say, but they are outside. You're right. It's a very similar thing.
One more thing.
Yeah.
What, do you have any comments on the Netflix Medici series?
I haven't seen it. I've avoided it. I don't,
It was filmed in Italy. I mean, it was made
Yeah.
in Italy and,
I wondered
I
too about
wondered
that
what you
beautiful
thought.
interior, if that had been, yeah.
yeah, I haven't, I tend to always avoid anything like that because I know their goal is to entertain you, not necessarily and the problem with watching things like that is then that becomes reality. That becomes, for whoever watches it, the truth. And it isn't necessarily the truth. I like those when they're scholarly, when they're cutting to a scholar and they interview the scholar. Like, that's why I liked the Cleopatra one and the Alexander, because those were scholarly. They kept them from going too far off, but there are lots of films about artists and I've seen a lot of them, but I try to avoid them because they tend to all have the same flaws. Yeah, maybe I should watch that, but any other questions? Yes, Floyd?
I have a word, would like you to, the word incarnation.
Oh, incarnation.
What I want to know is this word ever used except as this Christian thing?
No, the word incarnate is used a lot. We talk about someone incarnate, meaning like you're physically there, you're physically present. But incarnation refers to Christ, specifically taking form in Mary. But the word to be incarnate just means to be present. So,
There it's present.
yeah, present and physically there.
Incarnation is just.
Incarnation, the incarnation, then it's capital, like that's Christ. Yeah. And it's different from the transfiguration, and we'll get to some of these other terms later. Any other questions, anybody? Then I will see you all next week. Thank you.
This is the current one where
Yes, that's the new one that just started.
Yeah, I wasn't here last week, so.
Yeah.
All right.